David Hume, Why Knowing Better Rarely Makes You Do Better. Here is an uncomfortable question to open. Have you ever known with total certainty that something was bad for you and done it anyway?
Everyone listening just answered yes in their head. And the philosopher who explains why is not exactly a household name, which is a shame, because David Hume basically predicted modern behavioral science 2.5 centuries early.
Give us the man first. Who was he?
Hume was born in Edinburgh in 1711, and he is the quiet engine underneath the entire Scottish Enlightenment we talked about with Adam Smith. In fact, the two were close friends for years, and Smith always credited Hume as the sharper, more original mind of the two, even though Smith became the more famous name. Hume's early masterpiece, a treatise of human nature, published when he was still in his 20s, landed so quietly that he later joked it fell dead born from the press. It took decades for people to realize how radical it actually was.
So what is the radical part?
Hume was a thoroughgoing empiricist, meaning he insisted all our knowledge ultimately comes from experience, from what we actually observe, not from pure abstract reasoning sitting in an armchair. And he pushed that idea further than almost anyone before him dared. Take cause and effect itself, the idea that one thing makes another thing happen. Hume argued we never actually observe causation directly. We observe one event, then another event that regularly follows it, and our mind builds the habit of expecting the second whenever we see the first. That is custom, not proof.
That is a strange thing to say about something as basic as one billiard ball hits another.
It is deliberately strange, and it was meant to be unsettling. But the piece of Hume that actually changes how you live day to day is what philosophers now call the is-ought problem. Hume noticed that an enormous amount of moral and political argument quietly slides from describing how the world is to declaring how it ought to be, without ever explaining the logical bridge between the two. You cannot derive a moral obligation purely from a fact, at least not without smuggling in some value you have not defended. That gap is still argued over in philosophy departments today, and it quietly undermines any argument that claims morality is simply obvious once you look at the facts clearly enough.
And then there is the line people actually quote, the one about reason being a slave.
Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. Which sounds shocking until you unpack it. Hume is not saying reason is useless. He is saying reason is a brilliant tool for figuring out how to get what you want, but it cannot, by itself, generate the wanting in the first place. Your reason can calculate the best route to the airport. It cannot tell you why you should want to go anywhere at all. The desires, the passions, come first, and reason serves them, often quite cleverly, sometimes talking you into terrible decisions with perfectly logical sounding steps.
Which explains the smoking example you teased at the start.
Exactly. Someone who smokes almost certainly knows, as a fact, that it damages their lungs and shortens their life expectancy. That knowledge sits right there in their reasoning mind, fully available, fully understood. And it frequently loses to the immediate passion for the next cigarette anyway. Same story with overspending on a credit card, or skipping the gym, or checking a phone at 2 in the morning. The facts are not the bottleneck. The passions are running the show, and reason is mostly explaining, after the fact, why that decision was actually fine.
Now, Hume did not live in some peaceful, isolated study either. He had actual, sometimes messy, relationships with other major thinkers of his era.
The most famous and most painful is his friendship and eventual falling out with Rousseau, pronounced Rousseau. Hume, ever the generous patron, brought Rousseau to England in the late 1760s after Rousseau's writings had gotten him effectively exiled from parts of continental Europe, arranged him a pension, found him shelter, tried to protect him. Rousseau, who by most accounts was becoming genuinely paranoid by this point, eventually accused Hume of conspiring against him, of secretly plotting to humiliate and destroy his reputation. The friendship collapsed publicly and bitterly, playing out in an embarrassing pamphlet war that both men's admirers later wished had never happened. It is a small, human reminder that even Enlightenment giants could not always out-reason their own passions, which, if you have been paying attention, is exactly Hume's own argument proving itself in his own life.
There is real irony in that. Now, is Hume simply right about all this, or has later thinking pushed back?
Both honestly. Kant, writing a bit later, said Hume's skepticism woke him from what he called his dogmatic slumber, and then spent an enormous amount of effort trying to rebuild a firmer foundation for reason that Hume had knocked loose. Plenty of modern philosophers argue Hume overstated the gap between reason and morality, that reason can at least narrow down which passions are coherent or self-defeating, even if it cannot invent new ones from nothing. So do not treat Hume as the final word. Treat him as the thinker who permanently raised the bar for anyone claiming pure logic alone can settle what people should want or value.
Where does this show up in ordinary life, beyond the smoking example?
Think about a New Year's resolution written on the 1st of January with total, sincere conviction, reasoned out perfectly, going to the gym 4 times a week, no more late-night snacking. By February, the passions have quietly reasserted control, and the reasoning mind is busy generating extremely plausible excuses for why tonight is a special exception. That daily little collapse, over and over, in millions of people, is Hume's entire philosophy running live in your kitchen.
And this connects directly to something enormous happening in economics and public policy right now.
It connects almost perfectly. Behavioral economics, the field that essentially demolished the old assumption that people are purely rational calculators optimizing their self-interest, is in large part a modern, data-heavy vindication of Hume. People do not save enough for retirement even when the math is completely clear, because the passion for spending today beats the reasoned interest of a future self. Which is exactly why governments and companies now build what is called a nudge, automatically enrolling people in retirement savings unless they opt out, rather than simply explaining the math and hoping reason wins. That is a thoroughly Humean policy tool. Working with the passions instead of pretending reason alone will carry the day.
And that is a genuinely live, contested debate right now, not settled at all.
Not remotely settled. Supporters argue nudges gently correct for exactly the kind of reasoning failures Hume identified, without banning anyone's choices outright. Critics argue nudging is a soft, sometimes patronizing form of manipulation, governments and companies quietly steering behavior rather than respecting people's stated preferences. Both sides, whether they realize it or not, are arguing inside the exact framework Hume set up 250 years earlier: reason versus passion, and who gets to manage the gap between them.
There is one more piece of Hume worth including, because it says a lot about the man himself, not just the philosophy.
Hume was, by nearly every account from people who actually knew him, remarkably good-natured, even cheerful, right up until his death in 1776. He faced his own dying with a calm, almost playful equanimity that startled his contemporaries, including a famous, slightly awkward visit from a nervous Adam Smith, who found his old friend joking about the afterlife rather than fearing it. For a philosopher so associated with unsettling skepticism, Hume seems to have lived, and died, remarkably at peace with the passions he insisted were running the show all along.
So the real motivational takeaway of Hume is almost a relief, in a strange way.
It genuinely is. You are not broken or weak-willed simply because knowing the right thing does not automatically make you do the right thing. That gap is not a personal failure, it is the basic architecture of a human mind, and once you actually see it clearly, you can start designing your habits and your environment around it, instead of just shouting facts at yourself and wondering why nothing changes.
Which sets up a fascinating hard turn for next time, because the very man Hume tried to help, and then feuded with so painfully, drew almost the opposite conclusion from human nature.
Where Hume looked at human passion and habit and basically said, work with it, design around it, Rousseau looked at human society itself and said something closer to, it has corrupted us, and we need to imagine starting over.
Next time, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, pronounced Rousseau, and the explosive idea that human beings are naturally good, and it is civilization itself that ruined us. See you then.